Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's 4 o'clock, and we're going to try to cram in a really big story in about 30 minutes. Well, I guess exactly 30 minutes, or Stefan will tell me that I'm running behind. So welcome. I'm Christina Brophy from Mystic Seaport Museum. I'm Senior Vice President there, and very grateful to be running this fabulous project with my esteemed colleagues and several others in the audience. So what we're here to do today is to introduce all of you to this very exciting global project that is an ICMM project. So now you will be able to go to the landing page of ICMM, and thanks to Fiona and Sally, there's a really nice information page. So I'm going to be very brief to go through an introduction to the project, because most of this information you can find out online. So I want to introduce my colleagues here with me today. I'm going to go through the project, and then each of them will address their own collections and their goals of the project, and then we'll have a discussion and hopefully feedback from the rest of you. But Roland Leikauf from Australia National Maritime Museum, all at the end. Enric Garcia-Domingo from Maritime Museum of Barcelona. And Anna Arnberg and Mirja Arnshav from the Swedish National Maritime and Transport Museum. So just a quick, I'm not going to read everything, quick project timeline of where all this started. Actually, it's colleagues Anna and Mirja who started this conversation 2 years ago in Halifax, and just a huge nod to ICMM. This is why we all come to these conferences, is we have this fabulous germ of an idea, thanks to a paper that they presented at Halifax in 2022. Some of us at the conference started saying, hey, it'd be really interesting to think about refugee vessels, because some of us we have collections, we have vessels, we have oral histories, photographs, people who have been involved in some way in maritime refugee situations around the world. So that became, okay, well, who's going to do it? And then I kept calling Fred Hocker and saying, hey, who's still doing that? And he said, it sounds like you're doing it because you keep talking about it. So, so watch out. So what we did, Sally very kindly sent out a survey to all of the members of ICMM if they had anything that was in their collections or any interest in participating in a maritime refugee project. So we ended up getting about 40 responses, and then set up a core advisory team, which started meeting in November of 2023. And then we've been meeting about monthly and looking towards what exactly we're trying to accomplish with this project. I gave a presentation to the ICMM Executive Council. I just gave a keynote speech in Busan, South Korea, which was really wonderful for IMHA. And now we're here today to kind of continue that conversation. So this was a project survey questions quickly. Do you have a vessel? If yes, what do you have? Give details. How can I see it? What's available online? I keep forgetting there's a screen down there I can look at too. That's so exciting. And then if you answered yes to this, are you interested in participating? So we had a lot of yes, no, maybe, but we got about 40 yeses. And I'm inviting all of you, if you find any interest in this for your institution, I encourage you to please go to the landing page and reach out to me, and I can start inviting you to different events, and we can start thinking about how we can integrate your collections and stories into this larger global project. So the ones in orange are the core advisory team members, but you can see there are quite a lot of other institutions who have reached out. And then we have a couple of non-ICMM members now, including Yale University and the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York. So we're not just doing this with ICMM, we're reaching out to a broader audience. And actually, after just hearing Claudia's talk in the last session, she is now joining this team, because I'm making her. So when we think about refugees, and there was a lot to think about this morning, one of our biggest challenges is defining what we even mean by refugee. And what I love about this project, and why it's so inspirational, I think, to all of us, is it is a global conversation. And it's very diverse of what our own experiences in our own regions might be, what our politics are, what stories are out there, what triggers might exist for different audiences around some of these issues. So from the conversation this morning with Wayne Modest, which was absolutely wonderful, he talked a lot about, and we've had this conversation in several sessions, about the sea connecting us. But the sea can also be a very fearful place, a place of a border, a barrier, a crossroads. I think somebody mentioned the Sahara Desert. I think that was you this morning. So, it can be something very dangerous. Most of us, all of us in the room care about maritime. Many of us are mariners ourselves, and we might have a very different perspective on what the ocean looks like than someone who has to cross it in a time of danger. So a refugee, in the best of times, a maritime refugee could lead to freedom or opportunity, acceptance, salvation, reunion with family who are already in their future home. But it very often is also about danger, exploitation, loss, death, loneliness, and fear. So this morning when we were listening about, thinking about refugees or anybody being lovable or valuable, a lot of the times in our conversations and speaking to some refugees, it can be more about being feared and resented. So also I wanted to mention with Wayne's talk that sort of who gets to move, I thought was a really interesting question. So just thinking about the maritime refugees vessels themselves, I was walking through the park in Key Biscayne, Florida a couple years ago, and this refugee vessel is just sitting in the yard outside of a restaurant with no label on it. And I talked to the National Park Service supervisor, and he said that they get 100 of these a year at the very least, and they very rarely have any idea where they came from. And as part of the park, they're responsible for whatever lands on the beach. So this one they just thought was kind of cool, and they put it out. I found it slightly depressing because it still had broken things in it and sneakers and left behind material from whoever was on it. And we don't know the fate of the people of this particular vessel. So what as maritime museums should we be doing and collecting and stewarding? And that's actually a chapter of this that Roland is really spending a lot of time thinking about. So we looked at other models. This is the National Museum of the American Latino. They do actually 3D modeling of some refugee rafts. So this is a model that we can think about of a final project. There are a lot of publications, even children's stories of how to handle life as a refugee and being a stranger in a strange land. And there's a lot of new scholarship. Some of these are more scholarly than others, but really incredible literature out there around how museums are handling these issues, but also what is this sort of migrant aesthetics is a fascinating book if you have a chance to read that. But there's a lot of material out there now in the universe around these subjects as it's in the news every day. We've also been looking at different exhibitions that have already addressed these subjects. This is a Phillips collection a couple of years ago. And then also Ai Weiwei is a very important artist dealing with a lot of these issues. He's done films, he's done these big life jacket installations. I did reach out to his studio and ask him if they might be interested in being involved, and they said, "What's your budget?" And I said, "I don't have one." But we will. So we've also reached out to the United Nations, UNHCR. They're very fascinated or very interested in participating in the project. One of the things that's very important with them is they're very dedicated to the protection of lives at sea and also what happens to these people before, during, and after their journey. Where for us, one of the things we've been talking about is the boat being the middle of the journey, but of course there's a before and an after. So recently, Kristen, Sally, Fiona, and I were talking about creating a logo for this project, as it is ICMM, so how do we incorporate this project into an ICMM logo? And Fiona designed this template, this prototype. We do have a designer who's going to provide something soon. I'm sorry we didn't have it to present today. But in thinking about, I was thinking about what colors could represent a maritime refugee for a new logo. So I Googled what colors represent a maritime refugee, and I came up with the Refugee Nation flag, which is, some of you remember from 2016, there was a Refugee Nation flag for athletes who did not have a nation. And I found out the artist was Yara Saeed. So I called her. Well, I was in the middle, I don't know if my boss is here, but I was kind of in the middle of a board meeting when she called me back, and I left. But I found out that she happens to live in Amsterdam. She very happily allows us to use her colors for our logo, and I'm so grateful to the Scheepvaartmuseum for flying her flag today on this side of the building. You can see it as you go across the bridge, and she will be speaking with us tonight. She is a Syrian maritime refugee herself, and she's now a Dutch citizen. And she's a very big activist, she's an artist, and she has an amazing network. So she's going to be here tonight, also with Peter van Dongen, to talk about their work and refugees. I hope you can come to that as well. And there's a picture of it. This was before it was hanging, because I just took that, but it is outside the museum. So quickly, our project outcomes. So we have professional things, like we want to have new members join the project, hopefully new members to the organization. We would like to have a digital resource of refugee vessels, publish best practices, policies, guidelines, and term definitions for things like what is a refugee. Hopefully, in Australia, we will be able to do some panel discussions and perhaps some in-between Congress breakouts for this project. And then in our journal, we'd like to do a dedicated issue of Main Sheet. For the public, every one of these participating institutions will have access to the logo, which will have a QR code attached as well, so you can go onto the landing site of ICMM. So like for our refugee vessel, we can display it in our new boat hall as a part of a much larger global conversation about maritime refugees. And then also we'll do a maritime refugee exhibition online and an online refugee art exhibition. And the goal is that these would be vetted and worked out as a really wonderful global conversation, which would also, of course, include the voices of refugees themselves, and that this would be available for anyone to print and use in various ways in their own institutions. My goal is to also have a pop-up exhibition at the UNHCR Congress in 3 years, which I think would just be incredibly cool. I just wanted also to say this is a beautiful black and white, but yet only a year-old picture from ITF Seafarers Fund by Elijah Jose Barrios, and he was on a vessel off of Cuba, and they came across this group of refugees, and ITF was very kind to let us share this today, but we have oral histories and know a lot about this particular incident. So this is something that our seafarers are seeing all the time, so it's a very large global issue. So I'm going to just quickly give a very brief notes on 2 vessels on our campus and then pass it to my colleagues, and then we'll do some questions. But these are 2 vessels that one is ours, one is not. The Gerda III belongs to the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, and she was instrumental in the escape of hundreds and hundreds of Jews from Denmark to Sweden in the 40s. The museum in New York does not have a dock, so we have her as a sort of a permanent resident. And she's a beautiful little boat. Her story is incredibly powerful. And when even people who work at that museum in New York come and they step on Gerda III, they sort of break into tears. They have an amazing exhibition they just opened in the city that obviously doesn't include the vessel but has her story. And then Ana Luisa belongs to Mystic Seaport Museum, and she is part of our permanent collection. And she was actually sought out by one of our curators years ago who was interested in telling the story of Cuban refugees and the American dream. And so he went down to the Coast Guard and he found this lovely little vessel, Ana Luisa, and she happens to say Muriel on the stern. And so we didn't know who the people were on her yet, but he went to Cuba, to that town of Muriel, and asked who built that boat. Oh, that guy down the street. So he went around the corner, met the guy, and he said, oh yeah, that's all my family. And so now we know who all the people were on that boat. We're in touch with them. We have oral histories from them. We have material. Very much unlike that Florida boat where we have no idea. So this is a really interesting vessel for us to have in our collection. It's very unusual that we have so much history around her. So what I was hoping to do now is have each of my colleagues talk about their own vessels and their collections and their goals and inspirations for this project, and then we'll get to some other questions. So the first one is Sweden.
Yes. Well, the part you can see the remain of a boat, the bow. That's an Estonian boat that escaped from Estonia to Finland and then on to Sweden in 1944. And we found that boat on an island, and now we're taking it to the museum. It's part of a display there. It carried 13 people, a family with small kids, and you can see it's in a rather bad shape. It was deliberately destroyed by the Red Army on an Estonian island. And then refurbished by the islanders so that they could make the escape. So it was in a really lousy condition. The one that you can see in the exhibition, that's also an Estonian boat. We don't really know what family or what people came with it, but it belongs to the Naval Museum in Karlskrona, and it has been at the Naval Yard for quite a long time. The Swedish Navy was very involved in assisting the refugees when approaching the Swedish shores to help them safely into the harbor. And I think it's been 80 years since this particular event that I've been researching, the escape from Estonia. But still, it is a very vibrant history, and I've learned that it means a lot to the children and grandchildren of those people to be able to come to the museum and speak about this and learn also about these events, because it has often been quite painful so people couldn't really speak about it in the families. So there's a need still today to sort of get back to these stories. Yes, I think also that it's a nice initiative to be global, and because it is a story about displacement, and some of these people, they traveled on to Canada, to Australia, and so on. So we need to wrap it up and get the pieces together to see stories. They're really displaced.
I can just say something quickly about the grey boat in the middle. It's a minesweeper, and it's also, I think, quite part of the same story that you were telling about. It was a Swedish naval ship that had to rescue Danish youth during the Second World War, and it's part of the collection of the Maritime Museum, but cared for and by an NGO organization connected to the museum, and we have together with them done an exhibition that has been traveling along Sweden last summer, and it's also a good thing for us as a museum to be able to be a part of, we're located in Stockholm, but we can be a part of small towns all around the coast as this ship has been traveling along the coast.
Okay. Well, let me put in short the participation of my museum. We can sum up in two words: awareness and empathy. Let me tell you fast. You know, or maybe you don't know, that Spain has produced refugees for centuries. As a matter of fact, for generations, Spanish subjects have been refugees, exiles, or emigrants in huge numbers. At present, the tide has turned, and our country receives thousands of migrants or refugees from different countries. During the last 2 decades, Spain has become a destination and not a departure country. So we now have a lot of sea refugees arriving day after day. And that's one of the reasons why this topic is interesting for the Maritime Museum, and thus we are happy to participate in this global project. The second word, empathy. Through this initiative, we offer a proposal of topics that link our museum with the narrative of the women and men that suffered in the past and are now suffering the drama of forced migration, especially by sea. So for us, the question is that we can use this knowledge, this experience, and these boats that you can see here to explain a different history. Because from the point of view of a country that has expelled thousands of people, and it's now receiving people and they are not welcoming these refugees, we must remind them, we must make clear that we have a story in the same line. Our fathers or grandfathers were also immigrants or refugees. So we should we should receive these people remembering our past. So awareness is this part of the story. The other thing is that we have all these 2 small boats we call pateras in Spain. The police, the border control, gave these boats to the museum some years ago, but there are no papers, no file, no any kind of documents. And for us, it's interesting to use these boats to explain that we have boats without papers, talking about people without papers. What are papers? It's a bureaucratic matter. We have the boats, we have the people here. They are among us, so in some way we have to find a way to incorporate these people to our society. So for us, the goal is not so much related with preservation or the building of a good or big collections, but to use materials that are in our collections talking about us or about the others and trying to build a narrative that help especially the new generations to understand that we were migrants, we were refugees in the past, and these people in from different countries, different religions, even in different colors, are exactly the same as our ancestors. This is more or less the goals of my museum.
Wonderful. With that, and Roland.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Roland. I'm the curator of immigration at the Australian National Maritime Museum. And this is our refugee vessel, the Boat to Go, which means freedom, which arrived in late 1977 in Australia with 31 refugees from Vietnam on board, so refugees from the Second War in Indochina. And it's been an essential part of our collection ever since. Here you can see it when it was still waterborne, and here you can see it where it is now worked on by our conservation team. Now, we're eager in the future to find new ways of displaying the boat and also to tell its story, but also the general story of modern migration to Australia in the museum. And, well, if you all come to Australia in 2 years, hopefully you can already see some of that. Now, we joined this project primarily because I had the feeling that most refugee boats are far too disconnected. We don't really know why we made it possible to have them. I researched the other refugee boats that are in Australian collections from this area in the National Museum, in Darwin, and I found that it was very often either a window of opportunity allowing the curators to acquire them, or just one individual that said, this is really important. But they were always displayed isolated from each other. And I think this is wrong. It's a global narrative, so we should find a way of displaying all these boats together because they are wonderful objects of storytelling, sadly of harrowing stories, but I think they deserve a place in our collective memory. And why not get together with people from all over the world and make a project where we can do that, because that is, in my opinion, what ICMM is for, right?
That's great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So you can see there are questions of collections and storytelling and engagement with the community. There's also activism, social awareness, and I think, and Enric was mentioning it, we were chatting over coffee about Patty, we're paraphrasing Patty from this morning, about trying to develop that muscle of empathy in our visitors, which I think was just really brilliant, so we're stealing that too. But so just a question for you guys. What do you think are going to be the greatest challenges in this project moving forward for your institutions or for the project as a whole?
Initially, I thought it was going to be that we are so many institutions, so different topics. This is not an issue placed in time, it's global, but as we have met probably 3, 4, 5 times now, it's just we come to different topics like the collections, or what are we doing, what is our purpose, how can we work with the different communities. So I don't see that as much as a challenge nowadays, but as an opportunity. But we still have to meet at 10 o'clock at night or 7 in the morning, or depending where we are.
Yeah, somebody has to draw the short straw on that one. Enric or Roland?
Well, more or less, I told you about the main challenges. Some years ago at the museum, we prepared, as part of a big exhibition about trips, we put inside a small area talking about refugees. It was a moment in which the mass media talk a lot about. It was a moment of surprise. We were receiving refugees. Now, after 15 years, the situation has changed. At that moment was something new. Now is everyday news, problems, political problems, reactions from the far-right parties. Now we feel that we should talk again in a more, let's say, mature way. We know more, we have questions and maybe some answers. So for us, the challenge is to talk again about this matter, but in another kind of language, maybe militant, maybe is the way. I think we agree that museums, we should be active, militant. We are places, we talk about this morning, Maritime Museums is a place in which we can talk about everything, good for us. And it's a place in which everyone can speak freely. It's a common place for us, so we can use this richness, this tool that we have to talk about hot spots like that. I think we must do. We can do, and we must do. I think we want to do. So this is the challenge.
Yeah, and I think, of course, a boat is pretty big, so putting it somewhere, it is always challenging, but also rewarding. Boats, I always say when people ask me why do you want to use this? Because boats work. They're great tools for communication, but they also challenge us. But I'm really hopeful that we can learn from each other, because a lot of people that have similar boats have gone through similar problems. And I always say during our meetings that the best thing would be that we go to the other committees in the ICMM and talk with them about our goals and find out how they can help us. Because ideally, my dream is basically that any of you who want a refugee boat and suddenly have one on your hands, know who to go to in the ICMM and ask for help. So who do I ask how I do this? So what do I have to look out for? How did you do that? And that would be my dream, that it's pretty easy to just find someone to talk to about your experiences with refugee boats.
Yeah, and I think, in that, which I think is so fascinating too, is like the one in Key Biscayne, a lot of these are just burned, taken apart, thrown away, and there are hundreds, and particularly now in the Mediterranean, these are raft vessels. So how and what and where and who preserves what? I think it's going to be a big question that we have to face, and I think that that's going to be a big focus. And I think too, just to all of you guys, which I think Roland just mentioned, but it could be photographs, it can be oral histories, it can be living histories, but if there's anything that would speak to your interest in this, it would be great to have you on board with us. I know Claudia mentioned a little bit ago about the trigger of the boat. Like for us, our boat is a success story and a happy story at the end of the day, still a complicated and political story. But at the same time, like Yara was mentioning a trigger of Ai Weiwei using life jackets, but those are the colors she uses on her flag. So, but that for her is a trigger, but she uses those colors in her flag. So I think that's going to be an interesting question for us all to grapple with too, is making sure to be as inclusive as we can. So does anyone have a question? I think we're out of time, but maybe you can have one. Or you can also find us after if you have a question. But I do think we're actually out of time, unfortunately. But thank you so much to all of my colleagues on here, and everyone in the room who's already involved, and all of you who will become involved, and to ICMM for allowing us to do this project under their umbrella, because I think this is what ICMM is for, as Roland mentioned. So really, really appreciate all the support we're getting from Kristen Greenaway and all the rest of the committee. And thank you so much for Miguel for flying the flag and letting us have this conversation.
And I think we all want to thank you for all the hard work you put into this.
My pleasure. All right, thanks you guys.